Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another episode of 90 and a little extra. Today we'll be talking about fatigue and injuries in sports. I have the extreme pleasure of welcoming a friend of the house. This should be Jimmy's third cap, if I'm
Yes.
not mistaken. So it's a
Yes.
full-fledged 90 and a little extra international. So welcome onto the show, Dr. Jimi Yoshinaiki. Jimmy, welcome.
Thanks so very much for having me once again. It's always a pleasure being on the show and educating our audience.
It's
Good
always a
morning.
pleasure to hear you speak as well.
Yeah.
Good morning. Thank you very much for coming. All right, so let's get into it very quickly. You know, as a layman, we hear, oh, this person is injured, that person is injured, oh, sustained an injury. What can we actually classify as an injury?
Okay. So basically, when we talk about injury, we're talking about a disruption, oftentimes in the musculoskeletal uh, region of the body. So musculoskeletal means muscles and the skeleton. So if there is a disruption, so that disruption can mean maybe a muscle tear, it could be a bone breaking, it could be a tendon, tearing, it could be a ligament, rupturing. So if there's a discontinuation, okay, in the normal, muscle and skeletal architecture, then we talk about injuries. Then there's also the other side of it, which is the illnesses. So illnesses often talks about other things aside from the muscles, the tendon, the skeleton. So, for example, illnesses can be a player coming down with a respiratory infection. It could be a player coming down with headache or something. It could be a player coming down with, let's say a stomach pain. So those are illnesses. So in context, we talk about injuries and illnesses in sports, even though most people tend to uh, talk more about injuries. But again, players also can also have illnesses in sports.
Hmm. Okay, so while I like the fact that you've broken that down
Mhm.
into segments and not only taking the injuries into consideration, you've also looked at the fact that there are illnesses associated with potentially being injured as well. But there's another one that's been a recurring this one that's come up of late, and that has to do with fatigue. What can we
Okay.
consider as being fatigue, and what leads to fatigue?
All right. Thank you. So when you talk about fatigue, you're saying that you subject your body to an intense amount of training, okay, thereby leading to some form of uh, stress level in the body. So basically, that is called fatigue. So fatigue, in other words, can be called you subjecting your body to stress. So everybody can go through fatigue. I mean, driving through the city of Lagos, driving to the road of Lagos is stress, and that causes fatigue. Okay, yeah, I mean that causes fatigue. So in sports, players oftentimes would have to increase intensity of training, okay, and which subjects the body to a form of stress, which we call fatigue. So fatigue, in other words, is just the stress your body feels, okay, when it is subjected to an intense level of activity. But in the sporting climb, it talks about an intense level, of training. So basically, that is what we call fatigue. And fatigue is good, could be good, fatigue could be bad. In fact, there is a continuum. Okay, so we talk about, yes, there's a fatigue, there's what we call overreaching, there's what we call overtraining, basically. So, but maybe I will get to that point later. But fatigue basically is that stress, okay, that the body encounters. And oftentimes this stress a compensatory mechanism. Okay, so if you are working, okay, and you don't have stress, then there's probably something wrong. So whenever you subject your body to an intense physical activity, your body compensates by saying, oh, okay, this is getting too much. Okay, stress is coming in and you need to stop. I hope that makes a lot of sense. Good.
Yeah. Okay, so fatigue, stress, overexertion,
Yes, so basically they're
extending
all
yourself beyond
synonyms.
your quote unquote potential limit. So, mm, mm. Okay, so
So yeah, I
if
don't
we
know.
are to say,
Maybe
so for
okay.
injuries, for instance,
All right.
how do we manage or avoid uh, injuries?
Okay. All right. Thank you. I think before I go to the point of managing injuries, so let me talk about the continuum. Okay, what happens before you can get injury, or what can I mean? How can fatigue lead to injury? So we start from the point of you having fatigue. So we say an acute fatigue. So the season is, I mean, has ended in Nigeria, and a new season will probably kick off very soon. I mean, in football now. So when players get back to the field of play, they would, stress themselves, increase the training. The coaches get them
Mm,
into the camp, okay, and tell them that, okay, I mean, this the season starts very soon, and you need to train, train, and train and train. Now, so when you begin to train, now the body experiences fatigue, okay, and oftentimes when you rest, okay, the body comes back to normal, right? So oftentimes coaches think or believe that since your body is going to come back to normal after rest, then you can keep increasing the training. So that is fatigue. Now there's this other concept we call overreaching. So overreaching is now there are actually two types of overreaching. So we have what we call a functional overreaching and a non-functional overreaching. So let's start with the non-functional overreaching. So the non-functional overreaching says that okay, you are increasing your training load, you are increasing your training intensity, your fatigue level is going up, okay, but it's beginning to affect your performance temporarily, but without any symptoms. So you might not have a symptom such as, uh, you know,
mm,
what they call it now. So you might not have symptoms such as uh, infections, reduced immune system, depression. I mean, you are fine, but you're getting to a point in which your performance level is dipping, okay, though temporarily, because you've not had enough rest. So that's what we call the non-functional overreaching. So it means that you're already getting to a point in which you might eventually get knocked down, okay, but it is temporal, and oftentimes when you rest, okay, you get back to normal. But at that point, you're beginning to see a drop in your level of performance. Then the if you don't rest, if you don't recover properly, okay, and you begin to train, then you get to a point we call the functional overreaching. Functional overreaching says that you begin to experience, symptoms of fatigue. And symptoms of fatigue, I mean, oftentimes could be things like depression, could be things like become agitated on the field of play. You become, just cranky all over the place. Your immune system, drops, okay, and you begin to have,
mm,
infections. And oftentimes when players have this sort of infections, they think it's just normal malaria and all of that. But what is happening is that the stress level has dropped your immune system. So you are exposed to all forms, of illnesses because your immune system can no longer cope anymore due to the stress. So oftentimes the functional overreaching is symptomatic.
mm.
Oftentimes it's symptomatic. Remember, I said the non-functional overreaching is not symptomatic. So oftentimes the non-functional overreaching coaches don't catch it. I mean, coaches don't see that part. In fact, when player begins to express a non-functional overreaching, the coaches think they are doing well.
Mm.
This would even increase the training load. Okay, until you get to the functional part where you begin to have symptoms and begin to have a deep in the performance level. At this point, the player is subject to having injuries. Okay, so oftentimes the functional overreaching probably lasts for just weeks, lasts for days. Okay, then if the coach is not also very observant, okay, we now get to a point where we have overtraining, what we call overtraining syndrome. Now, you would understand that I've started from fatigue, non-functional overreaching, functional overreaching, and now overtraining. So, in fact, what people call overtraining, okay, might not actually be overtraining, okay? It could just be at the level of, fatigue and all of that. Now, when a player actually gets to over training, now you're beginning to have the symptoms of functional overreaching. You're going to have like classical symptoms. Oftentimes, it even take months for the player to recover. So at this point, begin to have players complain of many things. They want to pull out of sport. And a very good example of an athlete that had this overtraining syndrome, I think, is Simon Biles. Now, Simon Biles, she's been doing gymnastics for quite a long time. In fact, for people that do artistic gymnasts, it is expected that you start very early. So I suppose that she's probably started, doing gymnastics from the age of 3, 4 or thereabout.
Yeah.
Good. So over the years, she has subjected herself to massive training, fatigue, and all that. And I believe that when she began now, when she said she was no longer competing in the Olympics, it was a point of overtraining syndromes. She now began to talk about depression. And if you looked at
Jimmy, hold on.
Okay.
Let me cut you there.
All right.
Jimmy?
Yes, please go ahead.
Cut you there. You made a very valid, very, very, very interesting example there. And we're talking about overreaching here.
Yeah.
We're talking about overreaching here. So are you saying that overreaching can be physical or mental or both?
Yeah, both. Both, actually. It can be physical, it can be mental, it can be both. But oftentimes it's you would often see it more as a mental thing. You see it more as a mental thing. That is why, because it's mental, coaches might not catch it. Healthcare professionals might not even see it. So oftentimes it looks very sinister. But in fact, I've seen players that at that point they begin to get, cranky. They feel that, okay, why am I even doing this sport? Many things just begin to happen at that point in time. Their mental health begin to be compromised. But oftentimes coaches don't see it because it's not physical. Coaches don't see it because the players are not having injuries. Okay. But at that time, there are quite a lot of mental thing, beginning to crop up. And by the time they get to the overtraining, they just collapse. And that is why when you look at players that have had mental breakdown, they will tell you that it didn't just start at that competition. They would tell you, if you listen to their interview, a good example is Naomi Osaka. And she was like, she's been going through this for a long time. A good example is Simon Biles, that she's been going through this for a very long time. So it is always, like a continuum. So by the time they get to that point of overtraining syndrome, you're beginning to see, symptoms of depression, begin to see, things like lung infections. They begin to come down with injuries. They begin to have, difficulty in sleeping. In fact, a lot of them will begin to, struggle to sleep. A lot of them begin to struggle to even, eat good food. Now, for the ladies amongst them, now they begin to have menstrual irregularities. They just find out that, okay, my menses used to come at the 28th day. It's no longer coming at the 28th day and all of that. Some people begin to have, stress fractures, okay, which is due to, repetitive stress, on the bone. Okay, so at this point in time, you begin to have all these and injuries begin to set in. So you can see that at the point where injuries begin to set in, okay, it's oftentimes, something that has started, from the place, of fatigue, not recovering well, not having a high index of suspicion. So this is how fatigue, okay, can actually lead to illnesses and injuries. Now, back to your question, how can we prevent illness? How can we prevent injuries? Now, there are three concepts or four concepts, okay? And these are evidence-based concepts to prevent injuries. Now, the first thing is that for you to prevent injuries, you must know the incidence of injuries in your club or amongst your players. Okay. Now, it is so sad that, I mean, we are not a nation that keeps data. Okay. I mean, you could go to any, even NPFL team, most of them, okay, permit me not to use most of them, but, I can, stick up my neck that not many of them would actually have data. Okay.
All of them.
Now, yeah, I mean, they don't have data of, okay, this is the injuries that that our player has this season. So you need to understand the incidence of injuries. Now, how often do these players have injury? What kind of injuries are they even having? Okay, so that is the first place to start. So the first place to start in anything in life is to understand the magnitude of the problem. Understand the magnitude of the problem. Now, if you don't understand the magnitude of the problem, you would not be able to prefer a good solution. Good. So when you understand, okay, this is the kind of injuries players have. So, for example, you could have in your club, you could just, discover that over the past 2 seasons, players are coming down with muscle injuries, particularly hamstrings injuries. I begin to ask yourself, I mean, why is this thing common? So the next thing is that you begin to look for risk factors. So what could be the likely risk factors, for example, for this hamstrings injury? Okay. And you begin to say, okay, what could be the risk factors? Now let's use hamstrings injury for an example because it's quite common in the environment. Now, there are many risk factors for hamstrings injury. One of the risk factors for hamstring injury is that being a black player. And I mean, scientists are still arguing back and forth. Could it be a thing of gene or something? So being a black player predisposes you to hamstrings injury. An elderly player also, that means if you are aging, okay, you are more likely to have hamstrings injury. Number three, if you've had a previous hamstrings injury, you are likely to have another hamstrings. Yes, exactly. You're likely to have another hamstrings injury. Now, if your muscle strength, your muscle balance, particularly your lower, your thighs, your hips. Now, if you don't have a good coordination in terms of, balance and flexibility, you are likely to have hamstrings injury. So the coaches, the health practitioners working for the club understand these risk factors. Then the third part is, okay, how can we, do like a risk assessment? How can we mitigate? So mitigation means that, okay, I've known the risk factors. Okay, how can I, I've known the risk factors. So how can I prevent those risk factors from occurring? So for example, previous injury. So if I know that this player, I've had a previous hamstring injury, what do I need to do then? It could mean that I would need to tailor my training. Probably I will need to do a special training for this particular player. So when they all get to the field of play and they're all doing their normal training, normal routines, now I could probably subject this player to more training that's going to improve his hamstring strength. Okay. So if a player, for example, if you feel this player, for example, maybe age, age is a risk factors. You could say, okay, now because age is a risk factor for hamstrings injury, could I modify my training? Okay, or could I, let's say, elderly people in my team, those that are much elderly, can I subject them to some training, okay, that can improve their hamstring strength? Okay, now those are the ways to mitigate against those risk factors and hopefully prevent them. Then the fourth one is, you will test, these modalities and see whether it is actually working. So you will test them vis-a-vis data again, as these modalities reduce the incidence of the hamstrings injuries. Now, I know that this all looks so esoteric, and an average Nigerian coach or player would like, oh man, what is this doctor saying? This doctor is just spilling gibberish here and all of that. Yes, all those grammar. But now let us break it and let's make it more practical. Now, even if you don't have the data, the coach has to have a high index of suspicion. What kind of injuries do people have in my club? Now, last week, a young coach called me And it was like, oh, I just got to this particular club and I discovered that, I met a lot of injuries on ground. Now, that is a coach that means business and wants to do things well, and rang me up and says, okay, this is the kind of injuries I'm having on ground. And I had to like advise, okay, now these are the things you need to do. These are the things you need to do. Now, those are practical ways. You don't need a soothsayer. You don't need even a scientist to tell you that. So I advise the coach. I mean, these are the likely reasons why players might have injuries and all of that. Then why not mitigate it? Now, another thing I told the coach, one of the ways to also mitigate against injuries is to educate players, because one of the risk factors for injury is lack of education. So if you don't, for example, if you don't understand that you need to sleep well, I mean, for you to recover properly, then you probably have loads of injuries. Now, I've been with the national teams, and particularly on the 15, and you find out that sometimes you just have to like run after them, pursue them, make sure you sleep, put away your phones in the night, okay? Put them, in silent mode so that they don't disturb you. Now, some of them don't understand this. Now, they think that you're trying to rob them, of their phones. They think you're trying to rob them of that social media presence, okay? But again, they don't know. So you would have to educate them that when you sleep, sleeping is a form of recovery. In fact, sleeping is arguably the best form of recovery. Ask any athlete. Usain Bolt
Best
once
form of
said,
recovery.
yeah, exactly. Usain Bolt once said, I'm going to paraphrase him, and he said that in his career, he has never underestimated the place of sleeping. So if a player does not understand this, okay, then you're going to have, overtraining, overreaching, and all of that. So you need to do a lot of education. So I told this coach, you need to educate your players. Now, so you can see that these are simple, practical steps that coaches need to understand. And when you understand it, you can prevent injuries. Now, there are also, specific things that you can do to prevent, certain amount, certain types of injuries. A very good one is what we call, okay, for example, in football, you have quite, a lot of lower limb injuries. Okay, I mean, you have more lower limb injuries. Now, there is a particular paper by FIFA, and that study shows that in football, that players tend to have more lower limb injuries. So by lower limb, I'm talking about injuries from the hip downward. Okay, so they can have groin injuries, knee injuries, ankle injuries, thigh injuries, and all of that. And what FIFA has done over the years is to advise people to use a particular training modality. So there's this particular training modality called FIFA 11 plus training. So FIFA 11 plus training is a neuromuscular training modality to prevent lower limb injuries. Now, this training modalities, is evidence based. It has been shown that it can reduce the incidence of lower limb injuries. Now, the question is, how many of our coaches understand the FIFA 11 training, modality? Now, FIFA has not even said you should use those training modalities, just like that. You can adapt it, to your own form of training. Okay, so if you adapt those training to your people, to your environment, that training can help you reduce your lower limb injuries. And those training involve things like, plyometric, jumping up and down, building your core muscles, trying to run, in circles and all of that, just to increase your agility and all of that. So, these are things that you can use to actually prevent injuries. Another ways in which you can prevent injuries is, try to pick, okay, no, not prevent in this instance, but to prevent it from getting worse is pick injuries up on time. And that is what we don't do in Nigeria. We don't pick injuries up on time. And let me share some very awful story with us, on this particular platform. Now, I've seen players that has an injury. So let me share this recent one. So this player had an Achilles injury. Okay, I think I put it on my Twitter post, I think some days back. Now, this player had an Achilles injury, and oftentimes the Achilles injury could be that probably you're even overtraining, you're not wearing the right boots and all of that. And he had like a strain, just an overuse of the Achilles tendon, and it began to pain him. He has tried a lot of things, and he went to this particular healthcare professional, and a steroid was injected into that.
Sure.
Now, and there's something about steroid is that steroids can give you this temporary feeling of relief. Well, in
Yeah.
fact, I wasn't surprised because steroid is, I mean, steroid injection is one thing that Nigerian athletes abuse a lot. Okay, I mean, people just get injected in any other, I mean, they just find a
Mm.
way, they just inject themselves and all of that. So this player was fine for like 2 to 3 months. I mean, he was fine, good, playing well, and doing awesome stuff on the field of play. That suddenly the Achilles, began to pain him again, and after a while, the Achilles tendon
Mm.
ruptured. Now, when your Achilles rupture, then that is a very big problem. A very good example of, I mean,
Mm.
this guy, this Nigerian midfielder, Ogenyo Nazi. Now, on Nazi,
Yeah.
had has had Achilles, injuries over the years, and thank God he's just getting back. And do you know when that injury started? This World Cup, is it the World Cup that we played France, that France knocked us out? I can't remember that World Cup.
2014.
2014. If you
2014.
notice that, yeah, if you notice in that game, we were in that game until Nazi left the pitch. I mean, he
Yeah.
was at his peak. He was at his peak. He was playing for Lazio, and he was at his peak. And when he got out of that game, if you go on YouTube and you look at that tackle, it was a deadly tackle and got out of the pitch. And trust me, he was really managing that Achilles thing for a long while. At the point, it wasn't properly managed and all of that. But thankfully, he's back. Now, that's just to tell you how terrible that Achilles tendon can be. Let me also tell you how terrible it is. Now, if you've ever had an encounter with soldiers, one of the ways they will eat you, if they eat you on your Achilles, you fall down. If you
Mm.
if you've seen soldiers, deal with people, they just eat you there, okay, and you fall down. And that is why the English saying, there's this English saying that talks about, I mean, what is your
Achilles heel.
Achilles? Saying that
Yeah.
what is your,
Achilles heel.
what is your
A
Achilles?
weak
You're talking
point.
about what is your weak point, okay? And so that point, I mean, that tendon, if that tendon is damaged, your whole limb is actually gone. Your whole lower leg is actually gone. So, I mean,
Mm.
this player, he was ruptured. And, I mean, and he had to now resort to surgery. Now, could he have avoided surgery? Yes, definitely. If he had met the right person, okay, they will have told him what you need to do is just to rest. But sadly, Nigerian footballers, particularly Grafula, don't like to rest. When you tell them, oh, take a time of rest, they think that you are witch-hunting them. They think that you don't want them to go for that and all of that. But rest and rehabilitation, I mean, physical rehabilitation, I mean, can just be the game changer. But
So
again,
what?
if you don't,
Sorry, Jimmy. So what you're saying now is that in the case of that Achilles injury, all the young man would have been some time off the game just to
yeah,
rest and
yes,
recuperate.
some time of the game, rest, do some physical therapy. I mean, even if you have to have some injections, not a steroid injection. I mean, there are other injections that can
This
be
is
used.
this
Okay.
is steroids are banned, or some steroids are banned. So how are we
Uh,
sure?
yeah. So again, you're taking us back to doping. All right. So steroids. Now, steroids are banned only in competition.
Okay,
So you can actually use steroids out of competition. Okay. So out of competition means anything
we are on
before
the bench.
11:59. Yeah, 11:59 before the game. So you could use that. I
Mm.
mean, you could use some steroids, okay, out of competition. Okay. And
Some, not all.
yes. I mean, look, sorry. You can use all steroids out of competition. I mean, you can use steroid out of competition. Okay. All right. But the steroids you can use out of
Out of
competitions are
competition
what they
would be,
call.
hold on, Jimmy. Hold on. Out of competition would be, so for a footballer, out of competition would be the months between June and the month of June,
11:50.
basically.
Yeah, let's say 11:59. I mean, let's say you're meant to start your competition by, let's say, August, for example.
Hmm.
So you're meant to use. So out of competition means that between now and 11:59, before that game start. So and up, I don't know if you get what I'm trying to say. So you're meant to start your competition tomorrow. Let's say tomorrow, which is Saturday, you're meant to start. So out of competition talks about before 11:59. That is out of so anything after 11:59, you're already in competition. Hope that makes a lot of
Hmm.
sense.
So, for
Yes.
instance, let's look at it this way. So, there's a Premier League game on Saturday.
Yes.
So, by 11:59 tonight, 11:59
Yes.
p.m. tonight.
You're already
So,
in
between
competition.
I can use the steroid now, but by the time it's 11:59 on the day of the match, I can't use it again.
Yeah, you can't use it again. Exactly. And the steroid we're talking about
That's
here
a very tricky
is,
slope.
yeah, it is very tricky. But I think I need to really make it clear for our hearers is that I'm talking about glucocorticoids, not anabolic steroids. So anabolic steroids are banned also
Okay.
out of competition. So I'm not talking about all those steroids that make you add muscles and all of that. So I'm talking about
Yeah.
more of glucocorticoids. I mean, there are some type of as steroids that you probably use, and these steroids are oftentimes good, for recovery, muscle recovery, and all of that. So, for example, that Enyimba guy, he took a form of, glucocorticoid, and the reason why he was banned was because he took it in competition.
Mm.
In
So you probably
competition, that
took
means,
it. You probably took
yeah,
it 5 a.m. or 6 a.m. before the match.
exactly before the match and all of that. Now, even
Obviously,
though you
like you
might have,
explained. Sorry, Jimmy. Obviously, like you explained, um, it was obvious he was managing an injury.
oh, probably, or he was stressed, or he
Okay.
couldn't recover fast.
Okay.
You get
Okay.
what I'm trying to say?
Okay.
So some of these glucocorticoid, they have what they call an anti-inflammatory effect, so they can
Mm.
help you recover fast. So
Mm.
sometimes players will just use those particular things, okay, just for them to recover quite fast. But
Mm.
unfortunately, it was said according to the Yimba, doctor, or because I think I read a communique that that medication was found in competition. I mean, they argue that probably he had COVID, he was just recovering from COVID, and he had to
Oh,
use it and all of that. But even if you have to use it in competition, you have to seek for a
permission.
therapeutic use exemption. You have to seek for a
Okay.
permission. Now, if it was too late to seek for permission, you have to still seek for another type of permission called a retroactive TUE. So, I mean, those are some of the technicalities. But now, so that we don't divert into doping, now, even though you might be able to use, some glucocorticoids, okay, even out of competitions, now the danger outweighs, the benefit. Now, some of the
Mm.
dangers of this, people injecting all these glucocorticoids into their knees and all of that, is that it could predispose to rupture of a tendon, rupture of a ligament. Now, which was what happened to this particular footballer, very, very promising footballer. Now, what are we saying in essence? That you need to ask the right question from the right people, from people that are trained in injury prevention and injury management. So now, what took us here? We're talking about what early diagnosis before it gets, weary. And I mean, why is early diagnosis important? It's important because we are in a country that our health system is bad. Now, when players come to me, okay, we have this injury, this, what shall we do? And I tell them this, it's just a fact that sports medicine in Nigeria is a reflection of the health sector in Nigeria. So
Oh
you
yes.
cannot detach, the health of a player, from the overarching health systems. I mean, doctors are on strike, doctors are traveling,
Your
it's quite
colleagues.
difficult. Yeah, exactly. So it's quite difficult for you to even pay out of pocket. So a player gets injured, and for example, you go to Gobi. I mean, they probably look at you and like, is it an emergency?
Mm.
For that player,
It's an
it's an
emergency.
emergency.
Yeah.
Yeah, because that's his career. Now, some years back, a player went on Twitter and was soliciting for funds. And in my mind, I was like, I mean, you would not get funds. I didn't tell him that way, but that is just the reality because the only people Twitter would do a crowd sourcing for are those probably that have kidney issues, that are about to die. That is when
Mm.
people would give them, funds. But because people don't also understand the peculiarity of players, that whenever they have injury, is life and
It's a
death to
matter of
them.
life and yes, so
It's a matter of life and death to them. But again, most people don't understand. Okay, so you go to an hospital and they look at you like, and you tell them, okay, I've got this knee injury, it's been paining me. And some will just look at you like, I mean, is it an emergency? But no matter how that player will try to explain to them, they might not understand the severity. And that's because even as a nation, we are yet to even really understand what this sports medicine, this sports science kind of a thing is. So what do I advise player? As much as possible, prevent. If you can't prevent, as much as possible, detect it very early and look for the right people. Now, there are so many right people in Nigeria that you can look for. I mean, because if the injury progresses, see, I mean, a good example is how many of them can even afford an MRI? Now, guess how much MRI is in Nigeria? MRI is like the cheapest place you probably get an MRI, or the cheapest amount is probably 65, 70,000. It can range from that. It can range from that to 80,000. Now, most of these players, yes, most of these grass players are not even on salary. Even those that are on salary, even those on salary are not being paid. So if they have 80,000 naira, you want them to now go and drop the 80,000 naira, to do an MRI. Remember, it is just an MRI. That is not even part of the actual treatment. The MRI is just to show what is in the knee. Now, the actual treatment might involve you spending another amount of money. So you can see that it is a big problem. It is a very, very big issue. And that's why we need to really emphasize on this issue of fatigue, injury prevention, early diagnosis and treatment, and all of that. Now, people say in Nigeria, I mean, now, doctor, all these things you're saying, they are just, they are just, talking. You don't just understand the system and all of that. And I tell them that, see, these players, the problem is not even the money for most of them, because let me actually say this again. Now, some of them go to all these local people, and I'm not even against going to local people. I mean, the problem is not even with local people. The problem is that they have money to go to these local people. So, for example, some of them can have probably like 4 or 7 sessions or 10 sessions with this local person, and they might have spent up to 40,000 with that person. And I must say that some of these local people, some of them is just trial and error. So sometimes some of them they get it well, and sometimes it can really lead to complication. So you can spend 40,000, for example, to go to this local person, and you can't spend 5,000 to come and see me, for example, to give you an expert opinion. So you can see that now these things are also, a mindset kind of a thing. But thankfully, beginning to, good that recent times we're beginning to see that players are changing. Most of them have smartphones, they can read now, they now begin to understand their body themselves. So I think things are actually changing. So the problem, first of all, is not money, because some of them, if you look at it, is the mindset. So we need to really change the mindset through education, through encouraging them that these things is going to help them and all of that. Now, if time permits, I would, I think the other thing we need to discuss now is, how can you actually manage fatigue? Because fatigue is a thing of sport. Now,
that's actually the next question I was going to ask.
Okay.
So you can just go ahead.
Okay, so how can you manage fatigue? Now, this is a very, very difficult one in sports, because sports now is a money spinner. And these players are seen as supermen. As far as you're collecting millions of pounds, millions of euros, your business to be on the pitch. A good example is this. Is this Pedri? What's his name?
Yeah, Pedri.
That Barcelona. That's very young guy, and he has played ridiculous amount of games. And people are like, I mean, why are we subjecting this young guy, to such an amount, of stress and all of that? So in this, sports of nowadays, football of nowadays is a whole lot of stress, and we are not really considering players now. But what can we do? Football sport basically is about risk assessment, risk mitigation. Now, when the season is about to start, so there's something we call periodization. Now, I'm going to break all these medical jargons down. So periodization talks about how you manage your training. Okay, out of season, before season, and even in season. So there are 3 areas of periodization we are what to call the conditioning aspect. So conditioning means that okay, let's say your season ended, let's say April,
Mm.
and the next season is going to start August. So you've got April, May, June, July, August. So you've got like 4 months thereabouts to prepare for the next season. So in that 4 months, what you do is very, very important in optimizing your level of fatigue. So what you are meant to do is that it is expected, it is advised that the first 1 month, use it for resting. So I could take the whole of May off to rest, go see family, and do all of that. Then after that 1 month, it is expected that the player will start what they call the conditioning phase of training. Conditioning phase means that you are doing more of gym work, you are doing more of aerobics, you're trying to get your fitness back. At this point, it is not for you to go on the pitch and to start playing competitive games. And that is where most Nigerian coaches are faulting, are still lacking, this understanding. I mean, I'm not trying to send shit to any team, but I know some people are beginning to play preseason games, and I mean, you've not even conditioned your players. So, for
Mm.
example, if you play with NPFL stars, now
Mm.
let me use this
Mm.
as an example. So, I
Mm.
think recently Bagada FC played with NPFL stars,
Yeah.
and I can only talk from a sports science perspective. And please, those hearing this, I'm not trying to, say, okay, this wasn't right, but I'm only just trying to talk from a scientific, background perspective. Now, NPFL stars just finished their season, so they are fit. They are fit. So they develop fitness over a couple of months. So those guys are fit. So they have
Mm.
played a Bagada FC that I don't know when they got to back to camp. See, there's no way you win them.
Maybe just about a week or so, if
A
I'm not
week.
mistaken.
So ideally, I don't think they should be playing a preseason game, a competitive preseason game at that point.
Mm.
I mean, because again, where your players were away, were they doing their gym sessions? As a coach, did you ask them, were they, building their fitness level up, which is the conditioning phase? The conditioning phase is a lot of aerobics, a lot of endurance training. Did they build it up? So you are playing against an MPFL team. In fact, an MPFL team that just finished the season and they are in top level fitness. Now, you are not likely to win them. Aside from even winning them, you are subjecting your players to injuries because there's this what they call acute fatigue. So they have a high level of fatigue because they've not subjected themselves to intense training over weeks and over months. So at that level, what you're meant to do is just to what do a lot of aerobics, get them gradually build, their aerobic, build their cardiovascular strength. Good.
Yeah, but
Then
Jimmy, but Jimmy,
okay.
but Jimmy, why don't we also look at it this way? We're
Okay.
referencing Bagada FC that they are conditioning and process towards getting that match fitness or being match ready.
Yeah.
For their precision workout. What about the MPFL All Stars? That is that not an indication of functional overreaching? Because they
Okay.
also have just finished their season and are having to play more games.
Okay. Good. So
You get what I'm saying?
I get your games, and I would go to another concept now. So there's something we call acute and chronic training load. I will explain that to our viewers. So acute training load talks about your level of acute fatigue. So acute training means that, I mean, if you train today, okay, you will definitely get fatigued. If you train tomorrow, you will get fatigued for that day. Now those are your acute, training load or your acute level of fatigue that you get from the training load per day. Good. Then there's also what we call a chronic training load. Okay, which leads to your chronic fatigue. So your chronic training load is, the training you've received for 6 weeks and above, or some will say 4 weeks and above. Okay, now that is the
Yeah.
chronic load that you've had. So it is said that if your chronic load, if the ratio of your chronic load or your chronic level of fatigue, sort of, is more than your acute level of fatigue, it is said that you are actually having optimal level of fitness. Now, in simple words, what we are trying to say is that if you have developed fatigue over, if you have been used to training load over like 6 weeks and above, you will have developed a level of fitness. Okay. But if your training load, your training intensity, or your level of fatigue over a 6 weeks period and above is not optimal enough, then it is said that you are not fit. So for those NPFL players that are
Okay.
just finishing the season, most of them are actually, they have what they call a good chronic load compared to their acute training load. It means that
Mm.
they've been in season for 4 6 months, and they've developed that level of fitness over time. Okay. Now, although one must be very careful, because as you've said, you can also tilt to overtraining syndrome. Okay, but
Yeah.
we might not know now. But what I'm trying to say is that you need to have a level of fitness, and your level of fitness is actually a function of what you have developed over time, over a 6 weeks period and above. So it means your body has been used to training over that long time. So if your body has not been used to training for over 6 weeks and above, we said that you are still in the acute phase.
Yes,
So,
but Jimmy, but Jimmy,
okay,
but Jimmy, let me cut you there.
yeah, go
During
ahead.
the summer months after the Euros, we
Good,
saw on social media videos of players like Pogba, and the likes, showing us their off-season
good,
training, trying to keep in shape. But in all of this, we didn't see them. We didn't see videos of them playing actual matches,
good,
right? I think that is where the difference is, because he's come from playing a long league season, went to the Euros, got knocked out in the quarterfinals, at least in the Euros for between 2 to 3 weeks, and then he's on holiday. And whilst on holiday, just to ensure that they maintain a certain level of fitness, they keep training, but not probably training. The intensity of the training might not be as hard as when it gets into the thick of the season. That's where I see the difference. That they don't have a
okay,
match day situation compared to these guys that we're talking about.
okay. So I'm talking about NPFL stars relative
Yeah.
to Bagada FC.
Mhm.
So, relative to them, relative to to Bagada FC. Now, I'm talking about I'm talking in the concept of being relative to them. Relative to them, they just finished their season, so they probably have more chronic level fitness. They have more fitness than
Mhm.
Bagada FC. But if NPFL stars are meeting with a team that is also fresh and they are just starting a season, you would also say that the NPFL stars are less fit compared to those other teams. Hope that makes a lot of sense. So
Yes.
we are
Yeah.
trying to say that. So basically, I'm trying to say that relative to the Bagada FC boys, okay, you can't compare the level of fitness with the NPFL stars who just finished their season probably a week before that game. Okay,
Mm.
but when the NPFL stars, for example, are playing a fresh team about to start the season, those other teams that are fresh would be better than NPFL stars. So, for example, Bagada FC in 6 weeks' time. So let's say NPFL stars met Bagada FC probably 6 weeks into their own season. It is very
The
likely,
outcome be
yeah,
different.
the outcome might be different because they are more fit. Good. So it is expected that the NPFL stars now, before they start their season, they should take like probably 3 4 weeks of rest. Then they start their conditioning, which is what you see Bogba and the other guys doing. So they start their gym work and all of that. So that can take another 4 to 6 weeks or 4 weeks or thereabout. Okay. So they are beginning to build up reward. They are like their fitness. So they are not involved in competitive game at that point. It is called the conditioning phase. And this phase is very, very important. Then we have what they call the pre-competition phase. The pre-competition phase means that you are not doing less of those gym work, okay? You're trying to begin to do some technical works on the pitch. At this point, you are not playing competitive games as it were, but you're probably doing like ball walks in the field and all of that now. And even if you have to play a game, even if you have to play a competitive game at that point in time, you play against a very lower team so that it will not subject you to that level of competition. Hope that makes a lot of sense. So what I expected Baghdad FC to have done, what I think they will have done that at that point in time, don't play with NPFL players, play with one grassroots team. You understand? Okay, that would not subject you to that high level of competition. So in fact, such games is not for you to win. Such games is for you to fine tune your technical abilities. Hope that makes a lot of sense.
Yes.
Good. It's good. Then after that, you get to the point where you have the competition phase. So the competition phase is, largely what people call preseason tournaments and all of that. So at that point, you are already ready for the competition, ready for the season. Okay. And you can now, go, do all of that. So you can see, the progression. Though what I've said is good in paper, is in paper, but it's actually difficult in football nowadays. And for example, now look at our African players. By January, they are going to come back to Africa to play the Nations Cup.
Yeah.
And so it means that between now and you know that for those in the EPL, there are lots of games in December. They probably don't even have a rest. And they will now start another competition again in January. Now, this can be good, this can be bad. Okay. So if a player's level of fitness is not that top notch by December and it goes into, because the African Nations Cup is very, very, very physical. Very, very physical. So you are seeing guys from Burundi kicking you. They don't care whether you are from EPL or you are from Syria. You guys are dealing with, you are playing it out. You are like on the pitch, so it's quite physical. So, we must find a way, players must find a way to recover and to rest. But the most important thing is that I'm not saying you should do these things like 4 weeks off, 4 weeks that and all that, but you must factor these things in when you're training. You must really factor it in. So it means that you get back. Even before you go on before the season ends, your player understands all this. They understand that the first month is for you to see family, relax, chill, and do all of that. Then the next month should be start your gym walk. Okay, you don't at that point start your gym walk, do your aerobics, do a lot of bricks walking, running, and all of that. So by the time you are resuming to camp, now the coach is aware that yes, these guys have been doing all of these and all of that. Then you can now start, that pre-competition, phase of training where you have to do lots of technical work and all of that. You get what I'm trying to say? And that would lead you into the season proper. Now these are the things to do. Now, the other concept we need to talk about in periodization is about looking at other factors. So a very good factor we need to look at vis-a-vis the NPFL is that traveling. Not just traveling on bad roads. So you've got a game. So MFM is based in Lagos, and they've got a game, let's say,
in Maiduguri.
Yes, in Maiduguri. And for logistic reasons, they have to travel by road. And remember that they've just finished the game on Sunday and they have a game on Wednesday. So, when are they going to rest? So they get on the road on Monday, get to Maiduguri on Tuesday, and they're playing the match on Wednesday. And you want them to have fitness. You want them to play well. You want Genetra. You want Genetra to pick them so as to fulfill your ego of building NPFL players. You can't compare the level of fitness of such players to somebody playing in Europe that have got a well-managed season, a well-recovery plan. But what should coach be doing? What should coaches be doing? Now, if you know that you cannot really, manage these, things. It's not your fault that you have to travel through bad roads. Okay, it's not your fault. So, it's not your fault. Now, what can they do? What they can do is also to periodize their training. Periodization in this concept means that now, if you are going to play against Maiduguri FC or whatever club it is over there, make sure yes, El Kanemi Warriors. So what you can do as a coach is that if I have to train before that game, I'm going to subject my players to less intense training. I don't have to, I mean, less intense training. It is not time for you to now load them with training. Remember, they are still going to go through the stress of traveling. So in fact, it could just be just do some minor ball walks, do a lot of psychological training, work on their, mentality and all of that. I mean, that is what you're going to do. Now, if you know that, for example, if you're going to play against a team struggling with relegation, I mean, I don't need to do a lot of training. So, for example, if, for example, Manchester United last season was going to, play a game towards the end of the season against United, I mean, you know that over the season you've actually have a lot of stress. I mean, why overtraining again just because you want to play against Sheffield at that point? So you're trying to manage the what, trying to manage the what, the those exigencies just to ensure that your players are not fatigued. Then just be farming away from this point. Now, there's something we call risk factors. I didn't say this earlier on, but we talk about risk factors for injury. So we have what they call intrinsic risk factors and extrinsic risk factors. So intrinsic risk factors are things like age, sex, or gender. Sorry, I'm using the word sex, gender, and
Okay.
other things such as muscle, strength, and ethnicity, and all of that. So
Race.
those are intrinsic race. Those are intrinsic factors that can predispose you to injuries. Then we have extrinsic factors. Extrinsic factors look like the pitch in which you are playing, the weather conditions. Then we also have inciting factors. Inciting factors means that a wicked player just comes and sweep you off your feet and you have injury and all of that. Okay, so now those are three factors that can cause injuries. Now let's go back to the intrinsic factors. Now, intrinsic factors can be modifiable and non-modifiable. Modifiable in the sense that okay, we can modify those risk factors, and non-modifiable means that you cannot modify it. So, for example, a good example of non-modifiable is age. You cannot modify your age. You are 20, you are 20. Even if you lie, your body knows that you are not 20. Okay, so again, why are we having people having injuries in Nigeria? Again, if I mean the more you age, the more injuries you begin to have. So if somebody that is claiming 20 and is actually 30 is having injuries, I mean, we know that the 20 is just football age. Your physiological age is 30, meaning you are likely to have injuries. So you cannot change that. You can only change that in paper. You cannot change that physiologically. Okay, so you can't change that. You can't change your gender. For example, it has been said that females are more likely to have an ACL injury, and that's because of the way their body is shaped. They have this sort of V shaped and all of that. So that can lead to imbalance. Okay, so you can't also change your gender. You are either female or you are either male. Then modifiable intrinsic
That
factors are,
depends on the school of thought you belong to.
yeah, I mean, yeah, I'm talking from a very
If you
ethical
are,
and moral,
if you are
you
one
know,
of the woke generation, there are
yeah,
over 100 genders.
yeah. So over 100 gender. I'm talking from my own moral inclinations, religious inclinations, and all of that. Good. So you can actually modify that. Good. All right, but you can modify things like your training load and all of that. Now, even if you can modify the fact that a female is likely to have an ACL injury, what you can do is that is all about risk assessment, risk mitigation. It means that I would need to subject these females. That means for all the female in that club, I need to subject them to trainings, okay, that can help them what prevent ACLs injury. It is as simple as that. Then we talk about the extrinsic factors such as the pitch. Oh, good. This is a very good point. Now, most of the pitches we have in Nigeria are astroturf, which are very hard pitches. I mean, so they are astroturfs. Astroturfs are very hard, though very good to maintain.
Easy to
But
maintain.
yeah, well, I mean, easy to maintain because you don't really do a lot of things with it. But it is very hard surface, and because it's very hard, players are likely to have injuries on it. I mean, it is very hard surface. If a player falls on an astroturf, God, I mean, it could lead to a very nasty injuries, and we've seen quite a lot of that. Most pitches in Nigeria are astroturf. Okay, now can you do anything about that? I mean, you can't do anything about that. Okay, so you can see that these factors are there, and we're not really looking at these factors. Okay, now these factors would affect injury, will affect performance. Most of the guys coming from Europe are playing on natural grass. Okay, they are less prone to have these extrinsic risk factor injuries. So we must begin to look at that. Now, let me tell you our risk factors. Now, I've seen young players, okay, that have been playing national top for years and they begin to have what they call stress fractures.
Yeah.
Okay, stress fractures. And stress fracture is directly also linked to the stress, of play vis-a-vis the stress of the pitch itself. And I mean, what do you have to do for that? So what the coach have to do is to modify the training. I'm not saying the coach should not. I mean, the coach. I mean, that might just be the only training surface they have. So I wouldn't say they should not train on that. But the coach would need to look at, okay, how can I modify the training? Will I allow these guys to train probably less, okay, on this pitch, or so that they can have enough time to recover and all of that. So it's just about understanding these risk factors and seeing how you can modify them based on your resources, based on other environmental factors around you. And when you do this, I mean, you're likely to have a very good reduced injury level. The other ones in which you cannot even control is inciting factors. So a player can come and say that, okay, see, today, I mean you today, I'm going to break your leg today. I mean, you can't do a lot. You can't do a lot about that. But what FIFA is doing is to improve the rules and regulations of the game. So you know that if you do such, you might be banned for 5 matches and all of that. So I mean, that is why FIFA is trying to modify rules, bring things such as VAR and all of that into the game. So I mean, in summary, the coaches must understand all these. And in fact, the duty of a coach is risk assessment. I just always say that if you want to maximize performance, you have to be able to understand the risk, mitigate against the risk, do a lot of risk assessment. It's a lot of work. How many of our coaches are ready to put in this work? How many of our players are ready to put in this work? If we don't put in this work, we should not think that we're good. We can't. I mean, it's not going to be. And until these things are put in place, I mean, our players will keep having injuries. Their performance level is going to drop, and when their performance level drops, you're going to see it in their games, and you would not expect, our coach Genetro, for example, to now bring them into a national team. Okay, when you're not sure of their fitness level and all of that. So these are the things that NFF, NPFL, I mean, the LMC, and rules and all the administrators, they must put into consideration if we truly want to maximize, the sporting performance of our footballers and of our athletes in general.
Okay, so one final question, so we round up because we've gone over 1 hour.
Yeah.
Is there a tendency to mistake a loss of form for fatigue?
Wow. I mean, you put me on the spot, really. That's a very, very tricky question. Well, it can be either way. It can be either way, really. I must actually say this. Sometimes you can lose form just because you are not just good. I mean, just because you are not actually, they say this thing that form is it permanent? How do you
Form is temporary, class is permanent.
Exactly, class is permanent. Okay, you get. So you could just have a temporal thing and probably okay, maybe it's just like a flash in the park and all of that. Yes, I mean, there's a form of drop in form because probably you don't have the talent. Now that is possible, but there's also a drop in form because you are fatigued, and this is very, very important. There's a drop in form because you have some mental issues going on. I mean, most of our grassroots players, they finish playing football, they go and hustle to make money. I mean, they go to also to make money. Some of them don't even have enough time to sleep because they have to be, on the pitch of play. Some of them will just have just bread and beans they are eating every day, day and night.
No proper nutrition.
No proper nutrition and all of that. So you would discover that this thing also can actually can actually have a negative impact on their level of game at the long run. And that is why these are the things why these players, they get to Europe, they go for trials, and subject them. Yeah, I mean, they subject them not to just only physical training, they subject them to some cognitive level of training, because the football, football nowadays is about the science. So the coach is telling you that I want you to run 5 meters right, 5 meters not. That is the tactics. But again, if cognitive wise you don't understand, I mean, you would not do well. So we must begin to look at this holistically if we really want to have, a very high level, impact in sport. Everything still boils down to what making our sport professional. So in fact, if sport is not professional, all this thing I'm saying, they are just, as far as I'm concerned, it's just theory. If sport is not, yes, if sport is not business like, because again, if sport is business, you know that if our players do well, that is what's going to bring money to us. Then a team would invest in a sports scientist. A team will invest in a sport physician. A team will invest in a sports psychologist. A team will invest in a, those other professionals because
invest in the full value chain.
Yeah, the exact in that full value chain, because that this is going to give us money. But again, if it is not, they'll just say, doctor, then now you're only the doctor.
Yes,
it's not important to, and also everything still
all
boils
this
down
one,
to
all this one, they win league title.
No, exactly.
They carry us go continent.
They carry us go continent. So at the end of the day, these are the things that we need to look at, and it still goes back to, what do you want to do with our sport? Do you want to make our sport really professional? If you want to make it really professional, at least to have models that at least the least minimum we can begin to do is that the South African models, the Egyptian models. That is what at least we need to begin to, aim for. If this is not there, sorry to say, our sports, cannot really go far.
All right, so thank you everybody that's joined us. There's one question from Abdul Salam Okwemi, and the doctor will answer that question, and then we would say our bye-byes. He says, Doc, please talk about the place of nutrition, e.g. carbs on fatigue.
Okay, so carbohydrates is the is the fuel of athletes. So if you want to take your car out, you need to put fuel into it. So carb is what provides you that primary source of energy. So it is expected that before a game, you must have done what they call a carb loading. Nutrition will be another discussion for another day. But let's just try to summarize it. So you do what they call a carb loading. In other words, you have filled your tank.
How many minutes to the game? Or how many hours to the game?
Yeah, so it is expected that you will have filled your tank at least 8 to 10 hours before the game.
8 to 10 hours, okay.
Yes, before the game. I'm actually going somewhere. Fill your tank. Let your tank be quite optimal. Now, the 10 hours, so and this way I actually explain it. So let's say you have a game tomorrow morning by 10 a.m. So I think, let me put it in perspective. So I have a game tomorrow by 10 a.m. So between now and let's say 6 a.m. tomorrow morning, I have loaded myself with carbohydrate. It is very optimal. And to do that, I'm eating very good carbohydrate food like yam, rice, bread, potatoes. I'm eating, those heavy eba and all of that. So by the time I get to 6 a.m., okay, I'm very sure that yes, my carbohydrate level is quite, is quite optimal. So anything I do, so between 6 and 10 a.m. when I have the game, I'm still going to be eating carbohydrates. But the carbohydrate I'm going to be eating at this point will be less carbohydrates and carbohydrate that are not heavy. So between 6 a.m. and 10 a.m., for example, I won't be taking eba. Okay, so I could just take things like rice. It's just to top up. Okay, I'll take things like rice, take things like bread and all of that. So
that's 4 hours to the game.
Yes. 4 hours to the game. I can take bread. Just to top up. As I said, you take bread, but you take it in little quantity. So it is not a time for you to now, be like a glutton. Remember,
like a bricklayer.
At that point, like a bricklayer. So at that point, you are just topping up. Remember, I said that you have loaded yourself at least 10 hours before the time. Does that make sense? So anything you're taking at least 4 hours before that is just very little carbohydrates, not that heavy carbohydrate, just to top up. Now, an hour before the game, you can also take things like, bananas, okay? Biscuits, okay? Just take little biscuits and all of that. Take a lot of water. So you can take sport drinks that are very rich in carbohydrate at that point in time. So if you don't have money to buy a Gatorade or a
not sport, energy drinks. Sport
drinks. Not energy drinks. Sport drinks. So if you don't have money to get sport drinks at that point, like 1 hour before the game, you can get what they call ORS, oral rehydration salt, okay, which is just like 15 naira, 100 naira. So I mean that
Okay.
can also give you that thing. So in summary, we're
That,
trying to say that for you to actually take a carbohydrate, make sure that you have loaded. There's something called carbohydrate loading. Load yourself. So from now to tonight to like 6 a.m. So it means that tonight, before the game tomorrow morning by 10 a.m. tonight, I'm eating eba. I mean, I'm just really eating good food. I'm eating eba and all of that. Okay. In fact, that eba will still take you to like 4 a.m. to 6 a.m. Okay. So by it's around 6, 7 a.m. I mean, take another carbohydrate, but not as heavy as eba. Does that make a lot of sense? 1 hour to the game, you are now taking very little carbohydrates that are very, very light. So I can take biscuits, I can take sport drinks, and all of that. So by the time you start the game, your fuel level is actually optimal. Remember that it takes another like 45 minutes or 90 minutes for that fuel to burn down again. So you have to
yeah.
continue that cycle, with a lot of, proteins and all of that. But again, sport nutrition is another talk for another day.
Okay. So if I was to round up, I see Pedri, I see Paul Torres, I see Una Simone, I see the guys that went to the Euros and also still went to the Olympics, already featuring for their respective teams. And I'm kind of worried for them. Should we be worried that, they're being, what's that word again? Functionally being overloaded
Yeah.
or functionally overreaching?
Okay. Now, the good thing about these guys, when all these guys play for top club, is that they have a monitoring system. Okay. So they have a GPS system that monitors the what they call the external load. So external load are things like the amount of runs you make, the direction of your runs, how long you can make the runs. So they have like a GPS system. They also have another system that measures the internal load. So the internal load talks about how your body responds to this training. So oftentimes they put these things together, they put it on a graph, okay, and they can know that okay, oh, this guy is already getting to that red line. Then they modify your training again. So I mean, these guys have
Mm,
you know technology to monitor them. So when they are going above, the coaches, I mean, the backroom staff, the
mm,
sports scientists, the strength and conditioning guys, they inform the coach and all of that. And permit me to say this that we are trying a lot in Nigeria. I mean, I and some other guys, we're trying quite a lot to see how we can, use technology to manage fatigue in Nigeria, and maybe hopefully, I would talk you through this some other time. So looking for ways in which players can have an app, put in their details there, okay, how they feel before the game, how they feel after the game, then their wellness generally. Then the coach can get this information at the back end, okay. Then a sports doctor, a sports scientist can help them to interpret
can help
this.
interpret.
So yeah, interpret, and so that they can modify their training. I mean, these are things that I and a couple of guys are actually working on, because again, if you have objective and subjective data, it's also going to help coach. It's not just about all this. Well, okay, how you they feel today, and players say, okay, coach, I did fine, no, but I don't know what they do me, things like that. So when you have things that can subjectively and objectively monitor these things, then we can say what to do. So for Pedri, sincerely, I think for Pedri, he's in good hand, and if he's getting over, I'm sure that they have a traffic light system that can tell that okay, guy, you need to just calm down. The coaches will modify their training and all of that. But finally, that is not also an excuse for you to subject such a young player to such intense training and all of that. But again, they have certain tools that they use to actually monitor whether he's actually under training or over training.
Mm. Brilliant as always. Thank you, everybody that's joined us, and those that have dropped your comments. It's been a very enlightening session. Doctor has helped to broaden my mind. So now I do know that the word I'm taking away from this session is functional overreaching. That is the word that I'm taking away from this session. Once again, thank you very much, Dr. Jimmy, for coming. And as always, never turning us down and always enlightening us with those gems. Thank you very much, Jimmy. And to
Thank you
all
so
those
very
that
much.
tuned in, thank you very much once again. This has been 90 and a little extra live. Thank you and have a lovely day.
All
Bye
right.
for
Thank
now.
you so very much. Bye.
Thank you, Jimmy.
Bye.